Hello, everyone. As you know and can see, I am not here. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to sort of go through with you the information that is going to be on the guided notes so that you're all on the same page. So I hope that you all can see the screen over here. You should have open right now the guided notes. This is the notes you're going to fill out as we're talking. This presentation is also itself available on Canvas, so you will be able to see the presentation that I'm using. There are some videos embedded in it. I'm not going to show the videos on this recording because I think I want to just make sure I'm getting some material, but you can certainly watch them. I've also posted links to the videos on Canvas, so you have access to them. We're going to talk a little bit about the early 1960s. It's certainly, without a doubt, one of the most momentous periods, and especially the year 1963. We'll talk about some specific things. First, we're going to be talking about, the United States' increasing involvement in Vietnam. We don't really fully get involved until the next year, until 1964, but President Kennedy was dramatically increasing our involvement. We're going to talk about the March on Washington, which happened in August of 1963, and we're going to be talking about JFK's assassination. And pictures here, you see Vietnam. The March on Washington is there on the right, and then the JFK riding in the car prior to his assassination. I decided not to post the picture of him dead. President Kennedy, who was elected in 1960, is going to face a few major domestic issues. He's going to face, obviously, civil rights. Civil rights movement is starting to sort of pick up pace. It's sort of coalesced around Martin Luther King. There are other leaders as well, but especially as we're going to be talking about the March on Washington, it is Martin Luther King that is the major leader we're going to talk about. The country is facing how to address, implement, and sort of put in place Brown v. Board, which was 9 years earlier. Keep that in mind. It was 9 years earlier, and the country is still struggling with Jim Crow laws. It's still struggling with segregation. And finally, there's the continued fight against communism. Are there communists in the United States? What should we do if there are? What if it's American communists who certainly have no interest in overthrowing the government? Or what if there are American communists who perhaps have some links with the Soviet Union? Should those be different ideas? On the international stage, President Kennedy had a few really big things. First of all, the world was basically divided into two sections. There was the Western Democratic section, which is symbolized by NATO, which if you look on the screen here, you see that's the green countries. NATO's in the news quite a lot right now because of the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. And NATO's opposition at the time was the communist Warsaw Pact. That doesn't exist anymore because the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, but they were sort of the Eastern European countries. Early in President Kennedy's term, the Berlin Wall went up. The city of Berlin, which is in East Germany, was divided then between West Berlin, which was democratic, and East Berlin, which is communist. And of course, there's continued ongoing tensions in Vietnam between the communist North Vietnamese and the sort of Western aligned South Vietnamese. Start with the March on Washington. All right. I think this, so you see pictures of buses of people who came to the city of Washington, D.C., specifically to take part in the march. A good quote is, "One small disturbance could set off a wave of mob violence." There were some very significant fears that any rioting or uprising or even just unrest that resulted from the March on Washington could very easily turn into a massive, sort of period of mob violence in the country's capital. The official name for the march was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, which really sets out, I think, particularly well what the march was for. It was to emphasize the desire for equality in finding jobs and equality in housing and equality in just general civil rights that Black people were wanting. This was August 28th, 1963, and the world had not gotten much better since Brown v. Board. So on that date, between 200 and 300,000 people rallied on the Mall in Washington. For those of you who have not been to Washington, D.C., the Mall refers to the area between the Lincoln Memorial and, well, really, and the Capitol building, but specifically the link between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. That's sort of where the reflecting pool is. You've seen lots of pictures of it. On this day, there were a number of speakers. I think we have all heard of and are familiar with Dr. King's speech. He ended the presentation. But there were lots of others. John Lewis, who was a congressman for many, many years, he passed away a couple of years ago. But he spoke. He was a major civil rights leader. Bob Dylan, who was then at the beginning of his music career, performed. Joan Baez performed. There was a lot of people who performed on the stage. It was a big event. I sort of went over this, but the goal of the march was to rally the population and to get the government to take attention, to pay attention to the desire for these opportunities that civil rights leaders and just the general Black population wanted. I would argue, and I think many historians would agree with me, that the march itself was largely successful. It was peaceful. It brought tremendous attention down on the issues. And it does lead, perhaps not directly, but it does help move Congress towards passing the next year the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's a major event in American civil rights history. See, what they're marching for: higher minimum wages, control for all workers. This is, I don't need to tell you, this is the I Have a Dream speech. It is posted on Canvas. I'm going to ask you to watch it, or because I think that it is crucially important. This is only an excerpt of it. It does include the sort of concluding I Have a Dream part of it, but you should watch. I'm not going to show it on this video because I think that's, you can watch it on your own. The San Francisco Examiner, the newspaper in California, said the Freedom March on Washington yesterday turned out to be a profoundly moving demonstration. So big, so orderly, so sweet-singing and good-natured, so bold and confident, and at the same time relaxed, so completely right from start to finish, that America was done proud beyond measure. A ringing endorsement, if I've ever heard one. There was a march in the middle of the 20th century, the biggest demonstration for civil rights in history, and I was there. It's a quote from Llewellyn Bennett, who was certainly an attendee at the march. All right, so that's what I wanted to say about the March on Washington. You should, at this point, probably pause and watch the I Have a Dream speech. If you want to watch it at the end, that's up to you. I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about John F. Kennedy and sort of his 3-year presidency. First of all, he had a lot of siblings. He came from a Catholic family. John F. Kennedy is second from the right. His older brother was killed in World War II. Bobby Kennedy, his younger brother, is sort of in the bottom second from the left. We'll talk about Bobby for a while. Kennedy grew up very, very wealthy. He went to boarding school. He did okay. He was very smart, but oftentimes did not put forth his full measure of effort, which sort of the report card here illustrates. He was born in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston. These are all the things he did. You don't need to know that. I'm just sort of illustrating what his background was. He was thought to be quite handsome. He grew up very wealthy, was very prominent. He was elected to the Senate from Massachusetts in the 1950s. And when the 1960 Democratic nominating process began, he took an active role. He was a war hero. He served in World War II. There's a famous story that his ship, he was serving in the Pacific, was sunk, and he saved a man's life and one of his fellow crewmates by attaching him to a life raft, basically, and then swimming a few miles with the strap of the raft in his teeth to get to the next island, just to get to land. That island turned out to be uninhabited, not really suitable for survival. And so the next day he did the same thing. He put the strap back in his mouth, swam a few miles to an island that was more suitable. Obviously, eventually they were rescued, but he suffered lifelong back pain, well, partially at least as a result of this. But he was known as a war hero. He, had a young, attractive family. This is his wife, Jackie, his son, JFK Jr., his daughter, Caroline. Caroline is the only one in this picture who is still living. When he gave his acceptance speech. He talked about a new frontier, that the 1960s were going to be a new, challenging, exciting time period for the United States. His goals included some sort of really, what we would consider to be moonshots today: eradicating poverty, meaning there would be no people in the United States living in poverty if he, his agenda went through. And he had a specific focus on the United States space program. And though he's not going to live to see the United States send men to the moon, he will certainly, it was in his vision. It's the president and the first lady, president and his daughter, president and his son, but this is the Oval Office. This is the desk in the Oval Office. It's called the Resolute desk. There's JFK Jr. just playing. He had this image of being, young, athletic, a nice family. They referred to this period of time, historians and sort of the people in the media referred to it as Camelot, referencing, King Arthur and the Round Table. He was at the time the youngest person ever elected to the office of presidency. He was 43 years old. He was a Democrat. He was the first Catholic president. We have only had two. The second is President Biden. He was preppy. He had an all-American image. It was sort of a fresh kind of attitude in DC. President Eisenhower had served 2 terms. He was a little bit older, a little bit more of a previous generation. And so this was an idea of looking forward, really a new frontier. This was in his inaugural, just said, "Let every nation know whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, in order to assure the survival and the success of liberty." And of course, the most famous line from the speech is, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." That's, if you've ever been to see his grave in Arlington, this is sort of engraved on the stone. He had to deal with the Berlin Wall going up. We already sort of mentioned this. This is the stones of the Berlin Wall going up. This is what the wall looked like in 1988. In 1963, the president was getting close to running for re-election. He was traveling the country, trying to sell some of his programs, trying to rally support from states that perhaps might not always be super friendly to him. As you see on this slide here, it says, President Kennedy wanted for treason. You see it, that he is not the most popular man in Texas, despite the fact that he has a vice president, Lyndon Johnson, who was in fact a senator from Texas. And so he was viewed as, preppy and elitist and from the Northeast and Democrat and liberal, all these things that perhaps were not all that well thought of in Texas. Here is the president and the first lady getting off the plane. This is Air Force One. This is obviously a very famous outfit that Jackie Kennedy was wearing, and we'll see it again in a second. Shaking hands with supporters, again, crowds of people thronging the family, trying to meet them. Lots of people reaching their hands out. It was a general, he was well received, despite being perhaps not that popular. This is, you see a Safeway store. This is the first lady, the president. You can't kind of see him, but he's in the back seat. They are in the motorcade. There's the president and the first lady, Secret Service agents in the front, going down the street. This building is the Texas School Book Depository. It is right along Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. And it is from this window right here that President Kennedy was shot. Lee Harvey Oswald, people see on another slide in a second, aimed a rifle out the window and shot the president and the governor of Texas, John Connally. He killed Kennedy, he did not kill Connally. This is Lee Harvey Oswald after he was arrested, which was not that long after he fired the shots. There is video footage of this. There's something called, a gentleman named Abraham Zapruder had been filming He had a little handheld camera and he was filming, not knowing the president was going to be assassinated, but just that, hey, the president's in town, I'm going to film. You can find the Zapruder film on YouTube. I'm not going to link to it. No good reason to it, but if you want to find it, you certainly can. But this is the president's motorcade coming up to what will be the sort of final scene. I'm not going to, this video, which I've also linked to, is Walter Cronkite, who is by far the most well-known, best trusted, most reliable newscaster in the United States at the time, announcing live on CBS News that the president had died. The video is linked. You should watch it. It's short, but you can't imagine what the country was thinking. This is President Johnson being sworn into office. This is on Air Force One. On President Johnson's right, our left, we see his wife, Lady Bird Johnson. On his left, we see the former First Lady now, Jackie Kennedy, still wearing the same clothes we saw her come down the steps of Air Force One in, though now they are covered in blood. That jacket and the whole outfit are actually currently at the Smithsonian because they're so well known. The country went into a period of mourning. A young president killed too soon. This is an enduring image from the funeral. The funeral was, of course, obviously a very, very big deal in the country. And this is JFK Jr. saluting as his father's hearse passed. Sadly, of course, JFK Jr. died in a plane crash in the late 90s. His mom died of cancer in, I think, 1994. So there are no more. There's only one more. Only Caroline is left. But we're left with this man. We're left with Lyndon Johnson, who will be the president of the United States and will take us through some very tumultuous times, some of which we'll talk about later this week. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to just sort of shift gears. Make sure that I give you guys time, but you can pause this, go back through it. You also have these slides, like I said. I'm going to switch gears and go to talk a little bit about Vietnam. So first of all, this is Vietnam. It's a very long, thin country. It's much bigger than we think it is, but it's in Southeast Asia. It borders Laos, it borders Cambodia, and the South China Sea. I guess it borders China in the north. It's one of the prominent countries of Southeast Asia, just economically, militarily. It's quite powerful. In 1956, or excuse me, 1954, the country was split in two. There was at the 17th parallel. The northern part of the country was said to be communist, and the southern part was aligned with the West. So there's North Vietnam and South Vietnam at the time, very similar to what happened to Korea. In the late 50s, a civil war broke out because obviously each side wanted the country to be entirely unified, either entirely communist or entirely democratic, whichever side you're supporting. And so civil war broke out. This was, the country was, even before we and the West gets involved, the country was already, having some struggles. Elections were supposed to be held, but they were not, because the North, the communist part, attacked the South. The Viet Cong helped them. Viet Cong is a really, really, really important word. You see it on there. Viet Cong refers to people living in the South. That means living in the non-communist part of Vietnam, who supported the North. So that was a particularly challenging piece of the Vietnam War, was dealing with the Viet Cong. Five American presidents had to deal with Vietnam. You have Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and finally Richard Nixon. Truman helped France. France was involved in Vietnam first. Eisenhower believed in something called the domino theory. I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but that means that if one country fell to communism, meaning if all of Vietnam falls, then all the rest of Southeast Asia, maybe Laos and Cambodia and Thailand, might all fall to communism as well. It kind of did happen a little bit. He established in South Vietnam a puppet state, meaning we kind of controlled what was going on, but it was still technically independent. The United States put Ngo Dinh Diem sort of in charge of South Vietnam, but he refused to hold free elections. He was also very unpopular. First of all, he was not really seen as being from Vietnam. He was educated in France. He was Catholic. He also did not particularly identify with with normal Vietnamese culture. He felt that he was a little bit different. So he was not particularly popular, did not really inspire South Vietnam to want to follow him. He was also corrupt. He took money that was supposed to be for healthcare and development and business reform. All in all, not a great leader to have if you're about to go to war. People opposed his regime. There a lot of people self-immolated, meaning they lit themselves on fire. President Kennedy, before he died, he supported the overthrow of Ngo Dinh Diem in 1963. Didn't want to be seen as soft on communism, and of course, he continued to send advisors. We were not involved in the war yet, but by the time he died, there were 16,000 Americans already there. He got us into Vietnam in many ways. He, left as his legacy American involvement, and that's going to be taken up by President Johnson, who's first going to send in more advisors. And finally, what we're going to get to is the Gulf of Tonkin. So this is a body of water where you see the Gulf of Tonkin. It's right in sort of North Vietnam. The USS Maddox is attacked. It's pretty unclear whether or not whether we were actually attacked by the North Vietnamese or not. But regardless, the ship was certainly attacked. And that's going to be the pretext for allowing the United States to issue what's called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, meaning the United States, and especially the president, can, quote, take all necessary measures to protect American forces and prevent further aggression. It passed unanimously in the House and only was opposed by 2 senators. And all this means is that we're going to start sending troops to Vietnam. President Johnson pretty much could do whatever he wanted. So, ladies and gentlemen, that takes us through the 3 things I wanted to talk about today. Please watch the videos. They are going to be quite helpful. I will be available on email and Canvas. Tomorrow, you will be presenting your poems, I promise. If you have any questions, please let me know. Other than that, I will see you all tomorrow.